Hello, and welcome to today's webinar titled The Disciplined Management Process. My name is Mike Wilfley, and I'll be your host for this hour-long webinar. Today's webcast is brought to you by VCFO, a leader in finance, recruiting, HR, and technology consulting. We've been making companies stronger for more than 20 years through our outsourcing and consulting solutions that improve operational performance and optimize productivity. As I mentioned, my name is Mike Wilfley, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of VCFO. I've been with the company 4 years and oversee the operations in all of our markets, including Austin, Dallas, Denver, Houston, and Seattle. I'd like to introduce you to our speaker, Stephen A. Cook. As a Managing Director based in the Dallas office, Steve oversees operations and business development for the North Texas region, as well as manages our field team of professional consultants. His background spans nearly 40 years in financial and consulting industries, including President and CEO of finance and IT consulting firms for over 18 years, practicing CFO for 18 years, President, CEO, CFO, and SVP for businesses in the energy, insurance, real estate development and management, consulting services, and manufacturing industries. Over to you, Steve.
All right. Well, thank you for the introduction, Mike. Let me just start off with a comment. I'm going to give a little bit of context on this webinar. The genesis of this discipline management process was when I was involved in merging two companies with 7,000 employees, two completely different cultures, 6+ divisions, multiple product lines. And we had to come up with a cohesive management process for the combined companies. Since then, I have used it for company management, nonprofit management groups, project management teams, church groups, career coaching sessions. Bottom line is this disciplined management process, from my standpoint, applies to any complex business or project which will occur over time with multiple moving parts. Now, I'm going to do this webinar just as I would a live speech because I believe the anecdotes are relevant and I think it'll help the webinar. And I'm also going to do the webinar as if I'm addressing predominantly business owners. But again, it can apply to a whole bunch of different things. Now, I've had people when I've done this session say, well, I kind of knew all that already. I'm not going to be doing a highly academic session. My question to folks is, if that's the case, do you have the vision for the overall process? Hopefully, I will be giving you some tips on how to execute the process, but also at the very least, hopefully, I will be giving you some catchphrases that you can use with your staff or your team to communicate why the process is important. So let me just start off with a statement to give us perspective. For anybody that's ever taken a driver's test, in the Texas Driver's Handbook, there's a drawing that helps illustrate the fact that the faster the pace of life, the less perspective one can achieve. And it literally goes as follows. When not moving, a driver enjoys a field of vision of 180 degrees or more. When the car gets up to 20 miles per hour, the field of vision is reduced by approximately 2/3. At 40 miles per hour, the field of vision is further reduced by 2/5. And when you get the car up to 60 miles an hour, the field of vision is barely wider than the width of the beam of the headlights. My point is, as we go into this, for the business owners, when's the last time, and I can speak for myself, when is the last time we slowed down and just stopped, were still, and focused in order to gain perspective on our direction, the direction of our businesses, and on the environment that surrounds us. That is really the purpose of this disciplined management process. Now, it starts off, it is a 6-step process, but it starts off with focusing on value. What do we value? At the Milan Cathedral, there are 3 inscriptions over the 3 respective doorways that enter the cathedral. Over the right-hand door, there is a motto that reads, "All that pleases is but for a moment." Over the left-hand door, "All that troubles is but for a moment." But over the central door, there is a simple sentence that reads, Nothing is important save that which is eternal. The point of this is when I start working with the client, the first question I'm going to ask the client is, what are your central values? What are your goals? What are you aiming for? The business project process should not be an end in itself. It should be a means to an end. I'll ask my clients, why are you working so hard? Why are you taking so much risk? I would argue that if you ever have a consultant or a coach that starts off consulting or coaching without asking this question, then shame on them. There are a whole bunch of different examples of what the answers could be, and again, when I'm talking to clients, I make the comment on this one especially, your answer is your answer. It's not my answer. It should be what is important to you. Let me give you some examples. The very first client that I ever had when I started working as a consulting CFO was a couple. I went out and met with that couple and I asked them this question. I said, you've got a nice business. It happened to be about a $10 million business, 100 employees. I asked them exactly this question, why are you working so hard? Why are you taking so much risk? Their particular answer was they were in a niche business in the insurance industry. They were the second largest company that did what they did, and their answer to me was, we love doing what we're doing. We love going to national conferences. We love being considered experts. So we want to keep doing what we're doing, but we have all our wealth tied up in the business. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get some wealth out of our business. We need to diversify our wealth. And then the second thing is we're a $10 million company, and the number one company in our niche is a $27 million company, and we can't figure out how to close the gap. So the two things we want to do is diversify, and then we want to catch up with number one. You know, I looked at them and smiled. That was a very crisp definition of what it is that they wanted out of their business. The very next day, I met with a large retail distributor here in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. I asked him the same question, and literally his shoulders visibly slumped, and he said, Steve, I'm just tired. I just want out. My point to y'all is, can you see how I had to have that answer before I ever started working through any of the other elements of a good management process? I talked to a trucking company where the owner wanted to build the business up and give it to his kids. I talked to a roofing company where the owner wanted to use the business for faith-based giving. Again, very different answers that drive how that business is going to be built and how that business is going to be managed. So again, the very first part of a good, disciplined management process is focusing on what the shareholders or the stakeholders value. Mike, are you following me? Do you have any questions so far?
So your examples so far really are involving kind of indirectly exit planning. Is exit planning part of the stakeholder value question? And how far in advance should a business owner begin exit planning?
Well, that's a great question, Mike. I mean, you're really right. Sometimes the way that I will get to the answer for my clients is I'll ask them what they value, and they may struggle a little bit. And so I'll literally ask them the question, well, when do you want to exit the business? I actually had one say, I love what I'm doing. I'm never going to exit the business. And I smiled and said, you will exit the business someday. I encourage my clients that good exit planning should begin roughly 3 years before you really want to exit. I'll give the example of that retail distributor that said he was tired and he just wanted out. I spent a week looking at his processes and his numbers, and I went back to him. His name happened to be Steve as well. I said, Steve, I could get you out of this business, but the problem is if you tried to get out right now, you would end up selling your business for at least a 20% discount. And the reason is because you haven't run your business in a way that is conducive to making it sellable. When a business wants to sell, in theory, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to put together a 3-year pro forma. hopefully that pro forma is showing upward earnings. The goal of a sale is that the business should want to sell on those forward earnings. The first thing a buyer is going to ask is they're going to ask, why should I believe your forward earnings? If your answer is, I've got a track record of a disciplined management process where we historically set targets, we achieve our targets, we manage to those targets, we perform against those targets, then a potential buyer's got to nod his head and say, okay, I'll start with your pro forma. If you don't have that, and or if you've run a whole bunch of personal stuff through your business, then a buyer is going to say, I'm going to start with your historical earnings, and I'm going to cast doubt on pretty much those earnings and really spend time scrutinizing. And just that difference alone is going to make a 20 to a 30% difference in value. You know, it's interesting, on a totally separate basis, we have a wholly separate webinar that VCFO has that's called Double the Value of Your Business in 3 Years, and it focuses on the different parameters that are important to exit planning, and I would encourage all of the listeners here to go look at or listen to that particular webinar. But back to your question, Mike, the answer is absolutely yes. Exit planning should be part of that value equation, which is, when do I want to exit the business and under what terms? Now, once you get past that process of defining value, you go into the first step of the management process. And the first step of the management process is building a strategic plan. In the old days, we used to do 10-year plans, but the world changes too fast now. So I encourage most of my clients to do 3-year to 5-year plans at a maximum. And basically, what does a strategic plan do? It simply says, where do we want this business or department or project, where do we want it to be in 3 to 5 years out, or back to exit planning at the end of my business? Now notice that I use more than just financial terms, and throughout this you're going to hear that a good CFO is not just a financial officer, he is as much of an operating officer. A strategic plan is much more than a financial document. The financial piece is called a pro forma, but in a good strategic plan, the pro forma is at the end. It is not at the front. What are the things that a good strategic plan would focus on? Here's an example of a table of contents from a live strategic plan. And you can see that it focuses on the products that a particular business is going to offer. It's going to focus on industry, market. It's going to focus on the capabilities of the business. You know, you can look at all of these things, and then here's actually a second example of a plan from a strategic plan. So a good strategic plan is more of an operating document, but it focuses on all of the key operating elements that are going to drive the financial results over a period of time. Once I have a good strategic plan, I've got a vision for where I want to go 3 to 5 years out, I then go to the second stage of the process. The second stage of the process is building a tactical plan. A tactical plan is, what do I want to do over the next year that will move us correctly down the 5-year path? Notice again that a good tactical plan is much more than a financial document. The financial piece is known as the budget. Some people don't like that word, but that's what it is. The financial piece is known as the budget, but the budget, again, should be at the back of the financial plan, not at the front. It's interesting, when I do budgets for folks, or when a good CFO does budgets for folks, they highlight all of the key assumptions in the budget, because those key assumptions constitute management levers, and those are the things that management has to focus on tweaking. I give the example, if you're a highly sales-driven company, your management levers are, how many salespeople am I going to have? How many sales calls are they going to make? What are their closing ratios? What are their average size of new accounts? Again, each one of those things is a key management lever. And for every management lever, there should be a specific tactical plan to accomplish that desired result. And by the way, for every tactical plan, somebody's name should be next to that tactical plan. We'll come back to that in a second. Now, it's also important to understand, and some traditional, I'm a traditional CPA, so I can say this, but some traditional CPAs will focus on traditional financial documents, but a good tactical plan, a good budget should go to a cash flow statement. When I work with clients, I try to get all managers in that biz to understand how to read a cash flow statement, because cash is king, as we all know. It's not just P&L. I've actually had a business that had a great P&L, but they didn't focus on the difference in payment terms between their receivables and their payables. Their receivables were being paid out over 120 days. Their payables were due in 30 days. And they ended up going out of business because they didn't have the cash to float the great sales that they were doing. So good tactical plans go to cash. Cash is the ultimate measure. One last comment. A good tactical plan also addresses incentive compensation plans, because in theory, for each one of these management levers that I've discussed above, we want to put somebody in the organization that is incented and accountable to accomplishing that management lever. And so when we work with clients, a key part of what we work with clients for is to define bonus plans, incentive compensation plans, again, that will incentivize and reward specific behavior that we want to accomplish. I'm interested, Mike, do you agree with that statement?
Well, Steve, you and I, as two old CFOs, emphasis on old here, would like our business owners to go through this whole process in order. And but we also know that business owners live in the present and have their own immediate needs, and most of them would probably want to start right here at the tactical plan. How do you feel about owners doing that, starting here instead of stepping back and starting with a full strategic plan?
I'm smiling, Mike, because I have to acknowledge that all of us have to be practical. We can't just be academic, and I'm also smiling because I'm actually pretty good at doing things backwards. But seriously, any good business coach does have to be practical, start with where the client is at. And if there are some urgencies that require us to start with a budget and a tactical plan, then by gosh, that is something we will do. What I'll do, though, at that point is I'll really focus on the assumptions and make sure that throughout the budget and the tactical plan, those assumptions are highlighted. And I'll actually put a document on top that lists all those, because those are the key management levers. And then when we're done with that one-year plan and we've got our cash projections and we're feeling comfortable, then I will encourage the management group of the company to then, for each one of those management levers, to work backwards into a 3-year plan. I come back to that Texas driver's license example in the driver's field division. I mean, we need to have as far forward a look as we possibly can. We need to be looking forward. So I really will encourage people. Yes, if we need to start with the tactical plan, we'll do it. But as soon as we can, let's go back and build a 5-year plan as well. Once you get past the tactical plan, obviously, what do you start doing? You get into the operating period that's involved, and you start monitoring performance. Notice again, I don't use a financial term here. It is not just financial. For every management lever or assumption that we deem to be important, some form of a performance management report should be developed. Back to the sales example. If sales drives a company, then part of the monthly management report should be sales reports. How are our salespeople doing at the number of calls they're achieving, at their close ratios? I mean, it could be product development. I mean, there are just a host of things that drive the business. I make a comment that the financial results are actually trailing indicators. Once they've happened, they've happened. What you really are looking for when you get into performance monitoring is you're looking for leading indicators. I'm looking for the things that are going to tell me how business is going to be 2 months out, 3 months out, or for the rest of the year. So we really do want to make sure that we're doing full-fledged performance reports. Notice again, I make the comment here that we've got to get to the cash flow, and we've also got to focus on the incentive compensation targets. We never want to have our employees surprised at the end of the year because they do or they don't get incentive compensation. Mike, does this raise any questions for you?
Well, I know from my own experience as a COO, I get and can get inundated with management reports. And I know busy owners don't always have the time to review everything that's set in front of them. How do you help owners distill this information into what's important?
I actually forgot the comment here, so that's a good question. You can see my last bullet point here. I often say, as I am teaching my associates on being good consultants or being good CFOs, I often say the goal of numbers is action. I don't want a bunch of, oh my, that's interesting reports. If I put a bunch of reports together and my management team or my clients look at it and say, oh my, that's interesting, but they never make decisions from it, then I'm going to prune those reports out of the management reports. And one of the things that I really try to teach all of my associates, and when I'm mentoring controllers or CFOs, one of the things I will focus on is that you never provide a report, especially to a busy CEO, without putting some sort of a brief narrative or an executive summary on top of it. And basically what that's supposed to do is say, Mr. CEO, Ms. CEO, if you don't have time to look at this report, here are the top 10 things, top 3 things, top 5 things, whatever it is, but here are the top things that you ought to focus on as a result of reading this report. And you are exactly correct that we need to distill our information for the CEO. If he can look through everything, great, but if he doesn't have the time or she doesn't have the time, then our job as good controllers, as good CFOs, is to say, here are the top things that you need to look at. You know, it's interesting, I actually had my own business for a long time with, 4 different offices and 3 different product lines, and so I would get these performance reports, and I can tell you that mentally, I'd literally put them in front of me, and mentally the question that I would ask as I looked at those reports is, okay, do these reports tell me, am I going to meet my plan or not? So I mentally was going through the next step in the process. And the next step in the process is regular reforecasting. I don't want to change the budget, but I also don't want to put my head in the sand. If I'm not going to make the budget, and by the way, the reason I don't want to change the budget is that I want to learn over a course of years how good we are as a business at looking that far forward. That's an important skill for good businesses to learn, and back to improving your exit value. If you can demonstrate over time that we have been good at looking a whole year out, then we improve the credibility of our pro formas and our forecast, and we improve the value of our company. So I really don't want to change my budget or my target, but I don't want to put my head in the sand. If we're not going to make it, then I want us to acknowledge that we're not going to make it. Again, I want to focus on the cash implications of that, and I want to focus on the incentive compensation implications of that. Now, it was interesting when I put this company together with the 7,000 employees and the multiple divisions, and I was trying to teach my division presidents how to do this forecasting. I'd have them and their CFOs bring the forecast into me, and I'd look at them. Being from Texas, I'd look at them and say, my, these are awful pretty numbers. But Mr. Division President, how do you feel about these numbers? And they'd look at me and say, what do you mean? How do I feel? And I'd say, well, Ms. Division President, are you just giving me numbers that you think I want to hear and you don't have a chance of making them? Or are you giving me what I call a sandbag forecast, where you basically have stuck a whole bunch of things in your hip pocket and you could coast your way to this forecast? Either one of those is bad. If everybody gives me a bunch of sandbag forecasts, I can tell you right now, as an experienced CFO, I'm going to add those things up. I'm going to come up with a gloom and doom number for the company, and I'm going to end up making bad decisions. I'm going to start thinking about expense cuts that I shouldn't be thinking about if I had real scoop. On the other hand, obviously, if everybody tells me what I want to hear and don't have a chance of making it, I'll likewise make bad decisions. So either of those options, a sandbag forecast or a I'm telling you what you want to hear forecast, are bad things to have happen. So I don't want them to happen, so the question is, how do I prevent that? I would show, I'd ask my division presidents how they felt, and they'd look at me and say, oh, my forecast is right down the middle. Well, the way I would get to that answer is I would go through the next step. And the next step is, as part of the forecasting, is I would ask for a risk and an opportunity assessment. Okay, I want to find out what are the top 10 risks to your business where if you hit those risks, they could cause you to miss your forecast on the downside, and by how much. On the other hand, if you have a bunch of opportunities, I don't want to be just a gloom and doom accountant. Are there some opportunities out there that if those opportunities came to fruition, then I could beat my forecast, and how much? And what I would literally then do is, as the last step in the process, is for every risk and opportunity assessment, I would build a contingency plan. And that contingency plan would focus on who is responsible for the risk, minimizing the chance that the risk will happen, or minimizing the impact if the risk does happen. Likewise, for every opportunity, who has the responsibility for maximizing the chance the opportunity will happen or maximizing the effect. Again, a key element to this is that people's names have to go next to these plans. And if you look at the circular vision of this slide right here, the whole point is then that feeds right back into the strategic plan. It feeds into next year's tactical plan. Those become the basis for the next year's plan. Now, my experience and my whole premise in all of this is that if anybody that is managing a business, managing an organization, managing a project, if you apply the process diligently, i.e. in a disciplined manner, it's almost impossible to be surprised by an operating issue. And that's the goal of a CFO, or any manager for that part, but I'll say especially, that's the goal of a CFO. That's what I sell when I work with my clients. No surprises. That's my job. We've already talked about the statement that the goal is action, but I also want to make it one more comment. What is the job of a good CFO? The job of a good CFO is to turn the numbers into issues. If I'm presenting this to a business owner or a CEO, I say, you, business owner, CEO, you have to make the ultimate decisions. But my job is to use the numbers, and using the numbers to help you focus on the issues that are important. Mike, I've done a lot of talking. Do you have any other questions at this point?
I want to ask two questions. A question I didn't get to ask earlier was, when you're talking about forecasting and that's something you're doing regularly, and in your example and your plan it's quarterly, are you talking about changing the budget, or are you talking about changing the target? I know that comes up frequently, and as you know, that has a lot of implications for compensation, incentive plans, and so forth. So how does a forecast fit into the budget?
Well, one of the hardest things for a management team is to draw the distinction between goals, targets, budgets versus forecast. We all should set a goal, and the goal usually should be longer term in nature. I use the example of football teams. Every football team that starts off, their goal is to achieve the Super Bowl, or their goal is to achieve a winning record. That goal really should not change. So goals, targets, budgets, once they're established, they should be fixed. We're going to come back to this concept of accountability in just a second. one of the premises of this whole management process is to put people's names next to things. So when we set goals, budgets, and targets, I can put people's names next to those and say, this is your goal, this is your target, you're going to be accountable to it, and there are going to be, hopefully, rewards for achieving these, but if we don't achieve them, then we're going to be turning to you to say why. But again, the only way that accountability works is if you're not constantly changing the target. The target has got to be fixed. The budget has got to be fixed. But I'll come back to the statement. We can't dig our head in the sand. If we're not going to make the target, at a very least, the business owner needs to focus on that. If it has cash ramifications, which usually it does, at the very least, the business owner needs to focus on that. And back to the concept of starting in the middle of the process, that's why many of the times when I'm focusing with a new client, this will be where I start, is because they've got a cash problem. They can't figure out why they've got the cash problem, and so we kind of have to go backwards to the original budgets. Then we have to look at the performance monitoring, and then we have to look at a forecast and understand what was it that we were missing, what was it where we were digging our head in the sand that caused us to have a cash problem that is a surprise or that is unexpected. So to your specific question, no, we don't change the budget, we don't change the target, we don't change the goal, but at least twice a year, if not 4 times a year, we should reforecast whether or not we're going to achieve it.
Okay, good. And, now that I've seen, we've seen the whole circle, if you will, this process on paper and in slides makes perfect intellectual sense. But from your experience, what would you say are the biggest obstacles for implementing a process on a practical basis?
Well, part of the problem can be CFOs or controllers like myself that will try to implement the process from a purely bureaucratic standpoint or an academic standpoint. People have to understand that this has got to be a practical process, and it's got to be a process with a purpose. And we get back to that definition of shareholder value. Again, I have seen it implemented where it is just a set of rules. It is a set of procedures. It needs to be implemented with, this is a process that we're going through to achieve a goal, and we keep coming back to that goal. The second comment that I would make in response to your question is, I'll be frank, people don't like being accountable. When a business owner starts to put a process like this into a place, it can be a culture shock, and for some folks it can be somewhat unpleasant. Just the whole concept of discipline can be unpleasant. And again, I have an anecdote there where I make a comment to business owners when they'll talk about this process perhaps coming across as bureaucratic. I'll throw out the example that loose wires give out no musical notes, but when their ends are fastened, you get a piano, a harp, or a violin. Free steam drives no machine, but harnessed and confined with piston and turbine, it makes possible machinery. An unhampered river drives no dynamos, but you dam it up, and then you can get power. The point is, we have to be prepared to deal with resistance to this kind of discipline and to accountability. And part of the way we do that is, number one, we focus on positives as much as we focus on negatives. We focus on the end results and the positives that are associated with good end results. By the way, there's also a point where I really do look for good HR departments, because as we deal with incentive compensation, as we deal with this process, it's very helpful to have a good HR person that can assist with the communications and can assist with defining this well. But back to your question, number one, it's got to be a practical process with a purpose, not an academic rules-driven process. And the CEO needs to do a good job of selling the concept of discipline and accountability. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great answer.
I'm going to turn it back to you, Mike. I think I'm done with the session.
Steve, thanks for a very informative session today. Very good job. Listen, to everybody that's either watching this or has viewed it as a recording, if you've got any questions about what you saw today, please feel free to contact either Steve or me at the contact information you see there on the screen. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a very productive day. Goodbye.